Hi everybody, Professor H here. This video, we are going to talk about emerging adulthood. We are going to specifically take a look at what makes us an adult and the physical characteristics of emerging adulthood. And I just want to say at this point that emerging adulthood is a concept that is mostly related to developed countries. Developing countries do not normally have this period of time called emerging adulthood. A lot of kids in traditional cultures move right from adolescence, which is the period of preparing for adulthood, into adulthood. And we'll take a look at that a little more closely throughout this presentation. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Constructing an adult life. All right, and sorry it said chapter 10, this is actually chapter 9. So what is emerging adulthood? Emerging adulthood is a transitional period between adolescence and adulthood. And as I mentioned, this is something that is pretty much unique to developed countries. This period of time ranges from about the age of 18 to 25 years old. It can even go later. There are some key features that are related to this period of development. These key features are identity exploration, which is how we find out who we are, basically who we want to be. It's a period of instability. This is a period of development when the person is not very stable. They may move from job to job, from house to house, moving more frequently. They are more self-focused. They have a lot less responsibility to deal with than they will later in life. And they have a newfound freedom of moving towards adulthood than they had in adolescence. Oftentimes people during this stage have a feeling of being in between. And that is where somebody doesn't quite feel like they're an adult, but they're not a kid anymore. It is a period of possibilities where a person has a lot of different directions to choose from. They can go a lot of different ways. And it is the first real period of life where you are functioning in an unstructured environment. You've been in school prior to this, being told what to do, what time you need to do things at, when you have to do things. And now, all of a sudden in emerging adulthood, those responsibilities become your own. And it is up to you when you do things and when you get things done. So it is unstructured. So what are some markers of adulthood? What does it mean to be an adult? Well, several things can be construed as things that are adult things. So when you're adulting well, you would have a permanent full-time job. You would have economic independence. You are accepting the responsibility, the consequences of your actions. You are choosing your own belief system and your own system of values, not just that of your parents. You are relating to your parents as equals across the table. That's very much a Western theme right there. And you are testing different possibilities. So in developing countries, it's very different. Oftentimes markers of adulthood in traditional cultures are very simply, you are able to get married and you are able to have kids. That often is the primary marker of when you have left like adolescence and become an adult. There is not normally this period of emerging adulthood within traditional cultures. All right. So in the United States, the idea of the idea of emerging adulthood is a relatively new concept. And this concept has come into play because people live longer now and there is more of a need for education. So basically, as our lifespan is longer, we now can take longer to get from point A to point B. And in a society like the United States, where it is a very kind of wealthy society, and we have a lot of things that developed countries have, like the healthcare and school for everyone, that kind of thing, this period of development has emerged. Basically, in the United States, we have that personal freedom where we have the idea that doing your own thing is really important in the United States, becoming independent, doing your own thing. And these are ideas that are pretty much based on the Western model. So Western countries have those types of ideas, developed countries that are Western countries. There's something called the Mediterranean model. So in the Mediterranean model, instead of getting out there, like as soon as you graduate and wanting to try to get out there and spread your wings and all that kind of stuff, like you would do in the United States, in the Mediterranean model, men and women both are expected to stay living with parents until the time they get married, whether that's at 20 or 30 or 35. They're expected to continue living with parents until they get married. Cohabitation is also discouraged. So living with a partner of some sort is not encouraged, or even roommates. It's staying with your family, with your parents. Then we have something called the Scandinavian plan, or the Scandinavian model, and how they view this time period that would be considered emerging adulthood is differently than that of the United States or that Mediterranean model. The Mediterranean model, we're talking about like Italy and Greece, they have that similar model right there. Scandinavian plan would be the Scandinavian countries. They have some definite differences that allow people in the emerging adulthood period of life to have a lot more freedom than the model used in the US or the Mediterranean model. In the Scandinavian countries, the government subsidizes school, so their college education is paid for by the government. In addition, they have a lot of social safety nets. They have health insurance, they don't have to worry about that. They have housing stipends and things like that, where they don't have to worry about being homeless, and that they are not on the streets for any reason. And what is expected during in the Scandinavian plan is that a kid would basically get out of high school, and then they'd spend like the next 2 years kind of flitting around the Scandinavian countries or flitting around Europe, having odd jobs and just kind of seeing the world and feeling things out and getting an idea of what they want to do with their lives. And then after about that 2-year period of just flitting about during emerging adulthood, they are expected to go back and go to school and get their college degree. The 20s in the Scandinavian culture are kind of a carefree time. However, on average, people within the Scandinavian countries have babies at about 28 years old. So that's the average age of having their first child, is about 28. And the Scandinavian countries are open to the idea of having a baby without being married. So couples can have babies without being married, or that's just not something that's going to cause a lot of social stigma against them in a Scandinavian country. And that is definitely different than the Mediterranean or the model used like in the US. All right, so I took some information from the US Census, and this is a really cool paper, and I'll try to link it in your, I do have the references at the end of this, but I will link this paper on Canvas for you as well. The US Census Bureau, Changing Economic and Demographics of Young Adulthood from 1975 to 2016. And there are 4 traditional milestones to making you an adult. So these are the 4 main concepts within the United States that have been considered to be markers of adulthood. The first one is living independently. The second is economic independence and having like full-time work. The third is getting married, and the fourth is having children. These are 4 traditional milestones that indicate that you have made it to adulthood. Interestingly, the ideas about these 4 markers have changed greatly over the last few years. So here in 1975, if we look at the amount of people that met all 4 of those milestones, in other words, they lived away from their parents, they were married at some point, they have a child, and are in the labor force, there were 45% of young adults at that time were doing those things. In 2016, only 24% met those 4 milestones. So you can see there's kind of a cultural trend here going towards moving away from those 4 markers. The next 2 numbers here have to do with having 3 markers instead of 4. These both are 3 markers, and you can see they're pretty close still on those 3 markers. And down here, we see some other changes, but we're not really that interested in all of those changes. All right, the biggest things that changed were the importance of education and economic accomplishment. In 2016, young adults, and those would include emerging adults and young adults, said that education was very important, as was economic accomplishment. So the ability to earn some money and the ability to get a good education was ranked most important. Moving away from your parents' house was not considered important, and being a parent and getting married were not considered that important, and they were not really considered main markers of making it to adulthood. So instead of those 4 markers, the 2 main ones were education and economic. So getting a good job and getting an education. Some other changes in attitudes from the 70s up until 2016. There is a delay in marriage. In the 1970s, 8 out of 10 emerging adults and adults were married by the age of 30. In 2016, 8 out of 10 are married by 45 years old. So that has moved a great deal. Living in parents' home. So in 2018, talking about people 18 to 34 years old. So that's like our young adults up until our adults, our emerging adults, our young adults, and 1 in 3 lived with their parents in 2015. 1 in 4 think moving out is important, and 2 out of 3 report living at home and being happy. So this is a big change from the 70s. In the 70s, it was looked at, when you lived at home, it was looked at kind of negatively, like, why are you still there? Nowadays, as you can see, 2 out of 3 report that they are happy living at home if they are living in their parents' home, and that a larger number are living at home. Another difference between the 70s and 2015 or 2016 was that younger men are more poor now. They are poorer. Basically, in the 70s, it was easier for a young man to go out, maybe learn a trade, and just make a lot of money and be able to afford a home, family, all that kind of stuff, whatever they wanted. Whereas these days, it is much more of a struggle for younger men to make a good living. The other major change is in young women, or at least these are the ones that I thought were most interesting, so I pulled these out of the study to share with you. Young women, ages 25 to 34, in 1975, 43% of them were homemakers. And now in 2016, 14% are homemakers. So that's a big change in the number of women in the workforce. That's not saying positive or negative. We just have a lot more women now that work than used to. Oftentimes this is due to economic necessity, or because a lot of women are just very interested in working nowadays and having their own careers, not just the men having a career. In 2016, when we looked at 25 to 34-year-olds, 1 in 4 were living idle in their parents' home. In other words, these are young people who are not working and not going to school, and they're just living at their parents' home. Out of these group, they are also more likely to have a child, and they may help care for other family members, and 1/4 of them have some kind of disability. So there's a large number of young people or people in this age range that live at home with their parents. They have a disability, may have kids, may contribute by helping family members, but don't work and aren't going to school. All right, emerging adulthood. There are 5 distinctive characteristics of emerging adulthood. Age of identity exploration. So this is a period of time when people are likely to explore the various possibilities of work and of love. So they may have a higher likelihood of having romantic affairs with people. This is when this happens quite frequently. It's an age of instability. In other words, I mentioned that earlier, there's more job change, more changes of residence. They're self-focused in emerging adulthood. The emerging adult can afford to be a bit more self-focused because they're not usually caring for children yet. They're not caring for their elderly adults or their parents. And they can really have a time in their life where they can focus on them and moving themselves forward. It's an age of feeling in between, you're not a child anymore, but you may be not feeling like you're a full-blown adult yet, and you're not adulting completely yet. And it is an age of possibilities. It is a period of time where people can go many, many directions. All right, the cultural context of emerging adulthood. Europe has the longest emerging adulthood time. The age of marriage and parenthood is around 30 years old. So that's even a longer period of time than the United States. But some differences about the European countries is that they pay for education in college. So a lot of these European countries provide college education. So it is a little bit, and universal health care. So people have more time to explore because they are able to have health care, and they are able to also afford to go to school, which is very different than the United States. In Asian countries, one of the key markers of attaining adulthood is the ability to support parents financially. And that is a really big thing in the Asian countries. This is more important than any type of like identity exploration like you see in European countries. But then again, we're looking at the difference between individualistic cultures and collectivist cultures, which really find it important to take care of their own. Developing countries tend to split between urban and rural. So with developing countries, as I mentioned, the concept of emerging adulthood is very much a concept of developed countries, countries that already have some wealth that allows their young people to have a little more leisure time. In developing countries, that period of emerging adulthood does occur in certain situations. People who are in urban areas are more likely to experience emerging adulthood. In the urban areas, oftentimes there's more wealth, there's people with the ability to go to school, go to college, and they just have more wealth and have that ability to have that period of life. Whereas in rural areas, people have fewer opportunities for advanced schooling and for exploration. Oftentimes they need to continue going into whatever trade their parents were in, get married, do those types of things that are expected within their culture. Globalization and tertiary education participation increases the spread of emerging adulthood. So being able to continue with education as that is becoming more of a global thing, and then that is adding to the ability to other countries to have that period of time called emerging adulthood. All right, let's talk now about physical development. So physical development of emerging adults, this is the best physical shape that the person will ever be in. Emerging adulthood is a period of peak physical functioning. So your VO2, that's your oxygen intake, peaks in the early 20s. Excuse me, I'm still recovering from being sick. Your reaction time, grip strength, and bone density are at the peak. You are least susceptible to physical illness during this time. And the lifestyle kind of makes a difference here. In Western culture, the lifestyle of the emergent adult includes having poor nutrition, high stress, and a lack of sleep, especially if our emerging adult is a college student. So this may be physiologically a period where you should be in the peak health, but due to certain lifestyles, you may be suffering from some ailments at this time. One of the biggest things that we see in emerging adulthood are problems with sleep patterns and sleep deficits. So college students are more likely to show symptoms of delayed sleep phase syndrome. So delayed sleep phase syndrome is what occurs when you have a big sleep debt. So maybe you're going to work, especially in the United States, because you need to work, maybe go to school, try to balance all of this out. And then while you're going to school, you're probably not getting enough sleep. You're staying up late, you're studying. And so during the week, you're not getting enough sleep. So you acquire what's called a sleep debt. The way that your body tries to make up for this sleep debt is by something called delayed sleep phase syndrome. So these are on the days off or the weekend where you are sleeping a lot more than you normally would. This type of sleep debt actually causes difficulty with cognitive performance. It can lead to weight gain, emotional instability, more depression, anger, those types of things from not having adequate sleep. Not having adequate sleep is a very hard on your system overall. 2/3 of college students report sleep problems, 1/4 severe sleep disturbances. In emerging adulthood, people tend to move into having more eveningness than morningness. What that means is that instead of being a morning person, people in emerging adulthood tend to be more of an evening person. In other words, they're more cognitively sharp in the later part of the day, in the evening. Our adolescents, what we saw with them is that their sleep patterns changed to where they were not able to get up early in the morning. Schools were actually talking about starting at 9 o'clock because the adolescent brain doesn't even get functioning till like 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. And then they naturally don't want to go to sleep until 11 or 12. And that is a biological function that is occurring within the adolescent. And so they've moved from kind of that stage in adolescence, moving into emerging adulthood. That is still occurring. Not maybe as severely as an adolescent, but that pattern of eveningness is still there. Sorry, I'm gonna sneeze. 43% of emerging adults report sleep problems, or college students, emerging adult college students. Sleep hygiene is very important. And I put this in here because this is something that is really beneficial to everyone's life, is to develop what is called good sleep hygiene. So these are things you can do to improve your quality of sleep. Wake up at the same time each day, get regular exercise. Don't take late afternoon naps. Sorry, it says take late afternoon naps. I meant don't take late afternoon naps. Limit your caffeine intake, especially later in the day. And avoid excessive alcohol intake, because you may take 1 or 2 drinks and then you're like, man, I'll go right to sleep after I have these drinks. But what will happen is it disrupts your sleep patterns. You don't go through all of the sleep cycles in the correct way that you would for normal sleep. Sleep medications also disrupt your sleep patterns, so you don't go through those same sleep stages. So those should be avoided as well. For more information on this, there's the National Sleep Foundation. You can go onto their webpage and get information on sleep hygiene, because it's a very important thing that can affect every aspect of your life. Getting a grip on it now is good. Whatever stage of life you're in now, if you can get a grip on your sleep, it's a good thing to get a hold of, and it can improve your life in many ways. All right, risk behavior in emerging adults. Automobile accidents are a major threat to life and health of emerging adults. So car fatalities are highest between the ages of 16 to 24. And this is mainly due to inexperience and risky driving behavior. And we talked about the idea that younger people may have a little bit distorted view, like the personal fable, where they feel like they can get away with doing certain things that other people may not be able to, which can include speeding, driving under the influence, and these type of behaviors kind of linger on into emerging adulthood. Injuries and fatalities. Socialization impacts the number of accidents, especially when you're driving. If you're texting, if you're talking on the phone, you have distracted attention. So basically it's that divided attention where you're distracted that is more important than whatever it is you're doing. But having that divided attention is what causes a lot of accidents. Personality characteristics can promote high-risk driving. You know, if you're a risk taker, then you may just be taking those risks while driving automobiles as well. Reducing fatalities includes parental involvement and monitoring. This is important in the teen years. And as you become an emerging adult, you take these responsibilities on yourself. And at that point, it's time for you to be the adult in the situation and make sure that you are driving responsibly. That's why we have that graduated driver's licensing, and why it's so effective, because it gives you, you start off with limited abilities or limited ability to do legally what you want to do. There's more restrictions. As you get older, the restrictions are lifted, and that is due to your cognitive functioning, your increase in executive functioning, that planning and decision making, which is a lot better in emerging adulthood than it was in adolescence. Okay, rates of car fatalities by age. So when you start driving here, or, you know, around 16, when you're out on your own, this is when it peaks. For males especially, males have a tendency to do more risk taking than females. And then it declines. And then in older age here, you start having more accidents again in later life. But from the time you're, you know, in your 30s here, a little earlier for women, they kind of line out earlier. You'll see that this period of time is the most dangerous time for driving, is in your adolescence and emerging adulthood. Substance abuse peaks in the early 20s. The peak and decline possibly explained by unstructured socializing. Okay, so basically the way that this works is, depending on what you're doing in emerging adulthood, you may be having more drinking occur, or substance abuse, or it may reduce. College age students have more unstructured time. So once again, it's that time, you got too much time on your hands. You get to make the rules of when you come home, who you see, what you do, which gives you that freedom to get into a little bit of trouble and, you know, do a little bit more drinking and a little bit more substance use if you want to. So what happens during emerging adulthood is, as you go from having all this unstructured time to having more structured time again, it's structured time that you control, but you have a job. When you start getting a job or you have more responsibilities with college, once these things start taking place, you get a decline in substance abuse. So when you start off and you have that extra time and you're just, woohoo, I'm free, you see an increase. And then later on, as I'm like, oh, I better get to getting my stuff together and getting my stuff done, then you see that decline in substance abuse. All right, so that's it for this video. I appreciate you taking the time to view these. As always, feel free to email me, contact me with your questions, and we can go over it. Okay, take care, be safe, stay healthy. Bye-bye.